The pastel balloons bobbed against the ceiling, a cloud of soft pinks and yellows in a room that was achingly silent. On a small clothesline strung between two ficus trees, tiny, gender-neutral onesies fluttered in the breeze from the air conditioning. A 3-tiered cake decorated with sleeping lambs sat untouched on a dessert table, surrounded by platters of macarons and delicate finger sandwiches. Everything was perfect, and everyone was gone before they'd even arrived. My name is Juliana Parker. I'm 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and for the last hour I've been sitting in a beautifully decorated, completely empty event space. Well, not completely empty. My best friend Desiree was methodically packing the uneaten sandwiches into Tupperware containers. At 31, she still had the same no-nonsense energy she'd had in college, her expression a tight mask of fury on my behalf. Maybe their car broke down, she offered, not even believing it herself. All of their cars at the same time? I gave a weak, watery smile and ran a hand over my swollen belly. A Parker family caravan catastrophe. Sounds about right. We both knew it was a lie. My mother, Milena, is 58 and has never been late to anything that involves public perception. My father, Clayton, 60, follows her lead in all things social. And my older sister, Hallie, who is 34, would crawl over broken glass to be the centre of attention at a party, even one that wasn't hers. They weren't late. They had made a decision. Desiree stopped packing and came to sit beside me, placing a comforting hand on my knee. "Jules, I'm so sorry." I just nodded, staring at the gift table. It held one large, beautifully wrapped box, hers. The silence in the room was louder than any argument. It was a statement. A verdict on me, on my choices, on the baby I was determined to have on my own after its father, Spencer, made it clear he wanted no part in it. My family's silence was their judgment. My phone, which had been quiet all afternoon, buzzed on the table. I flinched. It buzzed again, a persistent, angry little vibration. I picked it up. A group text. The chat was named Family, and the participants were listed plainly. Mom, Dad, Hallie. My sister's name was at the top of the new message. My thumb trembled as I opened it. "Your baby shower is a shameful display. We're not coming. Love. All of us." The words seemed to float off the screen. Shameful display. Not my pregnancy, not my life choices, but the party itself. The balloons, the cake, the tiny onesies. A celebration of new life was, to them, a public spectacle of my failure to secure a husband first. The love all of us was the twist of the knife, a united front. A collective condemnation delivered with the casual cruelty only family can perfect. Desiree must have seen the colour drain from my face. "What is it? What did they say?" I couldn't speak. I just turned the phone so she could see the screen. Her sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. "Oh, Juliana, those absolute monsters!" I didn't cry. The tears felt frozen somewhere deep in my chest. Instead, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. I thought of the house. Not my apartment, but the house. The sprawling 4-bedroom where they all lived. The one my father almost lost a decade ago after a business deal went sour. The one I, fresh out of business school with a promising new job, had saved. I remembered the shame on my father's face, the frantic tears from my mother, the foreclosure notices taped to the door. I remembered wiring my entire life savings to stop the auction, taking on the mortgage myself, and putting the deed in my name to secure the loan. They had never paid me a dime of rent. It was just expected. I was the dutiful daughter, the family safety net. They lived under my roof. They ate food from a refrigerator kept running by the electricity bill I paid. and from the comfort of my house, they had typed out a message calling me a shameful display. My fingers moved with a life of their own. I took a screenshot of the message, the words stark and clear against the white background. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I'd added 2 months ago, a just-in-case measure I never thought I'd use. Savannah Mills, a top real estate agent in the area, 33 and known for being ruthlessly efficient. I attached the screenshot to a new message. My thumbs moved deliberately over the keyboard. List it. 10 years ago, the notice was taped to the heavy oak door with peeling packing tape, the stark red letters of notice of foreclosure sale bleeding slightly in the humid summer air. I was 22, home from college for the weekend, and I found my father, Clayton, sitting in the dark kitchen, staring at nothing. My mother was upstairs, the sound of her muffled sobs, a familiar soundtrack to our family's crises. My dad had sunk everything into a bad commercial real estate deal, a ghost mall that was supposed to be the next big thing. It had hollowed him out, leaving him with a bitterness that settled deep in his bones. He couldn't even look at me when I asked what was happening. "It's over," he'd mumbled. "The bank is taking it." I spent the next week on the phone. I called the bank, my voice more confident than I felt, leveraging the finance degree I hadn't even officially received yet. I walked them through my salary at the consulting firm I was about to join, my signing bonus, my pristine credit. I argued, I pleaded, I negotiated. In the end, I didn't just stop the foreclosure, I bought the house. I wired a down payment that represented every dollar I had and took on a mortgage that would follow me for the next 30 years. The deed was put in my name. It was the only way the bank would agree. My mother hugged me, her tears wet on my shoulder. "You saved us, Juliana," she'd whispered. My father just nodded, a muscle twitching in his jaw. They never said thank you again. It was as if my sacrifice was simply my duty, an expected tithe for being their child. The house became a monument to their failure and my quiet, unacknowledged burden. Now, 10 years later, that monument was for sale. Savannah Mills sat across from me at my small apartment dining table 3 days after the disastrous baby shower. She was sharp and impeccably dressed, her portfolio laid out with a practiced efficiency. She had already done a drive-by of the property. "It's a great house, Juliana. Good bones, desirable neighbourhood. The market is hot," she said, her tone professional but her eyes searching my face for cracks. "But I have to ask, selling this mid-pregnancy with family currently living in it? Are you ready for the potential drama?" I took a slow sip of my decaf tea, the warmth doing little to thaw the ice in my veins. "The drama has already happened. This is the solution. They'll have to be notified. Under state law, as tenants, even non-paying ones, they have rights. We'll need to give them proper notice to vacate." I met her gaze, letting her see the complete absence of doubt in my eyes. "They'll get the eviction notice just like everyone else." Savannah nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding or maybe respect in her expression. "Okay, then let's get the photographer scheduled. The sooner we have listing photos, the better." We spent another hour going over comps and strategy. As she was packing up to leave, my phone began to buzz. Hallie's face, smiling from a photo taken at a family Christmas 5 years ago, lit up the screen. I pressed the silence button on the side of my phone. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. And again. She called 5 times in a row before finally giving up. A string of texts followed. "Jules, pick up the phone." "Are you seriously ignoring me?" "Mom is a wreck. You're being childish." "This is not what this looks like." I deleted the thread without reading the rest. Desiree was right. They were monsters, and you don't reason with monsters. You just take away their habitat. 2 days later, Savannah called me. The photographer had managed to get exterior shots and some photos through the front windows, but my mother had refused to let him inside, claiming she was ill. "We can work with that for now," Savannah said, her voice tight with frustration. "But that's not why I'm calling. I just got a very aggressive inquiry. A cash buyer wants to waive inspection and is willing to go 10% over any other offer we get." My heart beat a little faster. "That's great news, isn't it?" "It's weird news," she corrected. The buyer's agent was asking strange questions, not about the roof or the foundation, but about the water pressure in the upstairs guest bath and whether the attic insulation had been replaced since the storm in Wait. He knew the layout of the house intimately. A cold dread washed over me. The guest bathroom was the one Hallie used, and the attic insulation was a project my father had complained about for years, but never finished. There was only one group of people who would know those details. "Juliana," Savannah asked, her voice cautious, "do you think your family is trying to buy the house from under you?" I thought of my mother's manipulative tears, her obsession with keeping up appearances at all costs. She would see this not as a betrayal, but as a clever way to regain control. "I don't think it," I said, my voice low and hard. "I know it." The knock on my apartment door was soft, almost hesitant, but I knew who it was. It was my mother's signature knock. 3 gentle taps, a pause, then 2 more. The sound of a woman who believes she is always welcome, but wants to perform the politeness of asking. I smoothed down the front of my maternity dress, took a deep breath and opened the door. Milena stood in the hallway, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a tissue in her hand like a prop. She dressed for the role of the grieving mother, in a muted grey cardigan and sensible shoes. "Juliana," she breathed, her voice cracking on cue. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer, just stepped aside. She glided past me into my small living room, dabbing at her eyes. She sat on the edge of my sofa, looking fragile and small. It was a masterful performance. I remained standing, my arms crossed over my belly, a silent barrier between us. "Your sister told me you're not answering her calls," she began, her voice trembling. "We're all so worried. That text. Oh, honey, it was a misunderstanding." I waited, saying nothing. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. It was a weapon she often used against me, but I had grown immune to it. She finally broke, the frustration seeping through her sad facade. "We were just trying to scare you straight. We were worried. You think raising a baby alone is wise. We were trying to make you see sense, to make you realize you need your family." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. They'd tried to humiliate me out of love. They'd boycotted my celebration as a misguided intervention. "You wanted to scare me," I repeated, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Yes, to bring you back to us," she pleaded, her crocodile tears starting to flow again. "We never meant to hurt you, and now you're doing this, selling the house. Juliana, that is our home. It's your family's legacy." I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room and picked up a glossy folder. I pulled out the professional photos Savannah had sent over for the online listing. The exterior shots were beautiful, the lawn a vibrant green, the oak tree I'd climbed as a child framing the house perfectly. I walked back to my mother and fanned the photos out on the coffee table in front of her. "Smile, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You're now living in a mid-century charming fixer-upper, great school district, motivated seller." Her jaw dropped. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a flash of pure fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "After everything we have done for you, you would throw us out on the street." "This is a betrayal." A betrayal! The word finally broke the dam inside me, and a cold, sharp anger flooded my veins. I have paid the mortgage on that house for 10 years. I pay the property taxes. I paid for the new roof 2 years ago and the water heater that flooded the basement last winter. You call that a legacy? I call it a decade-long emotional and financial debt. And my credit is officially maxed out. I stood my ground as she sputtered, her accusations of selfishness and cruelty filling the air. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just let her expose the raw, transactional nature of our relationship. When she finally ran out of steam, her face blotchy and her performance ruined, I walked to the door and opened it. "You'll get a 30-day notice to vacate, just like any other tenant," I said. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, before she finally stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Later that evening, fueled by a strange, restless energy, I started cleaning. I needed to purge, to get rid of anything that tied me to them. I pulled a dusty box of old financial records from the back of my closet, intending to shred most of it. Inside was a collection of manila folders from my first few years of working. One was labelled simply House 2014. I expected to find copies of the mortgage agreement and the deed, but underneath them was another, thinner file I didn't recognise. It was my father's. I slid the documents out. They weren't foreclosure notices or letters from creditors. They were brokerage account statements dated from the months leading up to the crisis. I scanned the numbers, my blood turning to ice. There was no bankruptcy. There were no catastrophic losses. There were just transfers. Large sums of money moved systematically from his business accounts into a series of newly created trusts. He hadn't lost everything. He had hidden it. My father had faked his own financial ruin, creating a fiction of insolvency to protect his assets from a lawsuit I never even knew about, and I had bought the house based on a lie. I drove to the house the next morning, the brokerage statements tucked into my purse like a bomb. It was a Saturday, and I knew my father would be in his workshop in the garage, tinkering with some half-finished project. I let myself in through the side door. The air smelled of sawdust and old oil. Clayton was hunched over a workbench, sanding a piece of wood. He looked up, startled, as I closed the door behind me. "Juliana," he said, his voice wary. "Your mother told me she came to see you." "She did," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. I walked over and placed the file on his workbench, right on top of his sandpaper. "I found this. I think you have some explaining to do." He glanced down at the statements. For a moment he looked like he might deny it, but the fight seemed to drain out of him. He sank onto a nearby stool, his shoulders slumping. He looked every one of his 60 years. "It was a lawsuit," he said, not looking at me. "A former business partner. He was trying to take everything. If I'd declared the assets, I would have lost it all. The house, everything." "So you faked being insolvent," I stated, the words tasting like ash. "You lied. To me. You let me believe you were ruined." "I was protecting my legacy," he snapped, a flash of his old anger returning. "That house has been in this family for 3 generations. I couldn't let some vulture pick it apart. Hiding the money was the only way to keep it safe. And having you take over the deed, it was the perfect way to ensure it stayed in the family, protected from any legal claims." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. I wasn't his saviour, I was his shield. A 22-year-old with clean credit and a naive sense of duty, the perfect front to hide his assets behind. He had used my love for him, my fear for their well-being, as a financial strategy. "So I was just a loophole," I said, the words barely a whisper. "A way to keep your name off the deed while you rode out the lawsuit." He didn't answer. He just stared at the grain of the wood on his workbench. I turned and walked out without another word. Back in my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Hallie. I almost deleted it, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. Mum told me what you said. You don't need to punish all of us for that stupid text. Hurt me if you want, but leave Mum and Dad out of it. They're old. This will destroy them. The performative self-sacrifice was so perfectly Hallie. She was offering herself up as the martyr, positioning herself as the protector of our parents, all while living in a house I paid for based on a decade-old lie. I turned my phone off and drove straight to Desiree's apartment. She opened the door and took one look at my face before pulling me into a hug. I collapsed onto her couch and told her everything, the faked bankruptcy, the hidden assets, my father's confession. I felt hollowed out, as if the very foundation of my life had been revealed as a sham. I can't believe it, I murmured, staring at the ceiling. All these years, I carried that burden. I gave up so much, thinking I was holding this family together. I thought I was their backbone. Desiree sat beside me, her expression grim. "Honey, you weren't the backbone," she said softly. "You were just the wallet." Her words were brutal but true. They struck a chord deep inside me, and for the first time since this all began, I felt a single hot tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, it was a tear of rage. My phone, which I'd turned back on, rang in my purse. It was Savannah. I took a shaky breath and answered. "Juliana, I have an update on that cash offer," she said, her voice all business. "The buyer's agent just sent over the official paperwork with proof of funds. It's a very strong offer, well over asking." "Did they say who it's from?" I asked, already suspecting my mother had found a proxy. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "They did," Savannah said, her voice careful. "The offer is from a holding company, but the principal buyer is listed on the documents. Juliana, the offer is from a Mr. Spencer Kennedy." The name hit me like a physical blow. Spencer Kennedy. The man who had looked at my positive pregnancy test with cold indifference and suggested I take care of it. The man I hadn't seen or spoken to in 7 months. My ex-boyfriend, the father of my child, was trying to buy my family's house. Savannah was still talking, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming through a long tunnel. "Juliana, are you there? Should I prepare a counteroffer, or do you want to reject it outright?" "Neither," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. "Give me his contact information. I'll be handling this one myself." I met him at a sterile coffee shop halfway between my apartment and his downtown office. At 35, Spencer still had the same polished corporate look that had once attracted me. Expensive suit, perfect hair, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was already sitting at a table when I arrived, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. "Juliana," he said, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him, "you look healthy." "Cut the crap, Spencer. Why are you trying to buy my house?" He took a slow, deliberate sip of his espresso. "I heard it was on the market. I figured I'd give our kid a real home, a legacy. Since its mother is so busy torching bridges," the condescending tone, the casual cruelty of referring to our baby as it. It was all designed to provoke me, but I was done being provoked. I was done being the emotional, reactive one. "Who told you the house was for sale?" I asked, my voice level. His smirk widened. "A little bird, one who's very concerned about her dear sister's erratic behaviour." "Hallie, of course." She must have called him in a panic, seeing him as some sort of white knight who could swoop in and save the day, restoring the family home to its rightful inhabitants. She would have spun a tale of me being unstable and vindictive. It was a brilliant, toxic move. My sister and my ex, united in their campaign to manage me. "It's not going to happen," I said. "I will burn that house to the ground before I sell it to you." "That would be arson," he said lightly. and very bad for the baby. My offer is more than fair. It's a clean, all-cash deal. You'd be a fool to turn it down. I stood up, my chair scraping against the tile floor. Consider it turned down, and if you or any of your shell companies contact my realtor again, I'll consider it harassment and file a legal complaint. I walked out, leaving him sitting there with his smug expression finally faltering, but the encounter left a sour taste in my mouth. My family was now colluding with my ex. They were working together, sharing information, united in their goal to wrest control from me. The next day, Savannah called again. "We have our first official showing scheduled for this afternoon," she said. "But I have to warn you, your sister is there. She's claiming she has a right to be present as a resident." I felt a surge of frustration. She's going to sabotage it. "Legally, I can't remove her," Savannah said, "but I'll be there to supervise." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I needed to know what was happening in that house. I needed to see what they were doing when they thought no one was watching. An idea, cold and calculated, began to form. I made a quick online purchase for same-day delivery. 3 small Wi-Fi-enabled security cameras. That evening, after Desiree helped me install them, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the upstairs hallway, all disguised among bookshelves and decor, I settled in to watch. The first viewing was a young couple, and Savannah was a consummate professional guiding them through the house. But Hallie was always there, lurking in the background. She'd sigh dramatically and mention the drafts in the winter. She'd point out a barely visible water stain on the ceiling from a long, fixed leak. It was petty, but it was working. The couple left looking uncertain, but it was what happened after they left that made my blood run cold. I watched on my laptop as Hallie walked into the pristine kitchen. She looked around, then leaned over the gleaming stainless steel sink and spat directly into the basin. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a small plastic baggie, and began scattering clumps of what looked like pet fur onto the dark hardwood floors and upholstered dining chairs. She was deliberately making the house look dirty, unkempt, and unappealing to scare off legitimate buyers. I watched her, my expression calm, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. She thought she was being clever. She had no idea she was handing me the exact ammunition I needed. The next morning I sent the video file to my lawyer. It was short, clear, and damning. By noon he had filed for an emergency restraining order against Hallie, citing willful destruction and interference with the sale of private property. A process server delivered the papers to the house that afternoon. The order stipulated that she was not to come within 500 feet of the property. Since she lived there, it was, in effect, a legal eviction notice she couldn't ignore. The family's response was immediate and explosive. It was no longer about quiet manipulation. It was about all-out war. That evening, a post appeared on my mother's Facebook page. It was a photo of me from a few years ago, smiling with a long, rambling caption about my delicate mental state and their deep concern for my well-being and that of my unborn child. "Our daughter Juliana is going through a difficult time," it read. "Her erratic behaviour and hurtful actions are a cry for help. We are asking for prayers as we navigate this crisis and try to get her the support she needs to ensure her baby is born into a safe environment." Hallie shared it, adding her own commentary. "It's heartbreaking to be legally barred from your own home by a sister who is clearly unwell. We are just trying to protect her." Friends and distant relatives started calling, their voices laced with pity and suspicion. The smear campaign was brutally effective. Savannah called me, her voice strained. "2 more viewings just cancelled," she said. "The buyer's agent mentioned seeing some disturbing things online. Juliana, this is getting ugly. It could stall the sale indefinitely." I felt a familiar wave of despair wash over me. the feeling that they would always find a way to win, to drag me back down into their toxic orbit. I was sitting on my couch staring blankly at the wall when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognise. "It's Bailey, your cousin. I saw what they're posting online. It's disgusting. I know you don't want to see any of us, but I can come over after my shift tomorrow to help you clean out the rest of your old things from the house. You're right, they've used you long enough. Bailey." My younger cousin, just 30 years old. She had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, an observer like me. Her offer was a tiny pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. It was the first time in my entire life that a member of my family had taken my side. The next day, as Bailey and I packed boxes in my childhood bedroom, the weight of it all finally hit me. I sank onto the edge of my old bed, the floral comforter faded and worn. "I don't understand how they can be like this," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "They were supposed to be my family." Bailey stopped folding a stack of old sweaters and looked at me, her expression full of a sadness that seemed far older than her years. "They were never a family, Juliana," she said quietly. "They were a business, and you were just the insurance policy." Her words echoed what Desiree had said, but hearing it from someone who had grown up on the periphery of my family's dysfunction made it land with a different kind of finality. It was the truth. I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a utility, an asset to be leveraged. That evening my lawyer called with an update. While doing a title search to prepare for closing, his paralegal had flagged something unusual about the deed transfer from 10 years ago. He had dug deeper. "Juliana, are you sitting down?" he asked. "I am." "The signature on the deed transfer, the one that signed the house over to you from your parents, isn't yours. It's a very good forgery, but the notary who supposedly witnessed it has been deceased for 5 years. He died 5 years before the document was dated." I felt the air leave my lungs. "What does that mean?" "It means your parents transferred the deed into your name fraudulently," he explained, his voice grim. "They likely did it to shield the asset from that lawsuit without giving you the chance to say no. You legally own the house now because of a statute of limitations on challenging the title, but the initial transfer was a criminal act. You could sue them for fraud." With Hallie legally barred from the property and the threat of a lawsuit hanging over my parents, the sabotage stopped. The online smear campaign fizzled out into pathetic, ignored posts. Savannah was able to bring in a new set of prospective buyers, a young tech couple from out of town who fell in love with the house's vintage charm and weren't plugged into local gossip. They made a strong offer and I accepted it immediately. The closing was fast. The official notice to vacate gave my parents 2 weeks to leave the property. The silence from their end was absolute. No angry calls, no pleading texts. It was an eerie, unsettling quiet that felt more like a gathering storm than a surrender. A week before the final move-out day, my father showed up on my apartment doorstep. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his shoulders stooped, his face etched with exhaustion. He wasn't angry anymore, just defeated. "They're packing," he said, his voice raspy. "Your mother hasn't stopped crying for 3 days. She doesn't know where we're going to go." I didn't offer a response. I just waited. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wanted you to have this," he said, holding it out to me. It was a copy of the forged deed, a reminder of what this family was supposed to be, of the legacy you're throwing away. It was one last desperate attempt at guilt, one final play from the only book he'd ever known. I took the paper from his hand, my fingers brushing against his. His skin felt thin, like parchment. I looked him directly in the eye, and then, very slowly, I tore the paper in half, then in half again. I let the pieces flutter from my fingers onto the doormat between us. "She had me," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable, "and she chose to use me instead. You both did." He stared at the torn paper, then at my face, searching for a flicker of the dutiful daughter he had created. He found nothing. He turned and walked away without another word. Move-out day was a spectacle. When I arrived with Bailey to do the final walkthrough, a moving truck was parked haphazardly on the lawn, and my parents were shuffling back and forth with boxes, their movements slow and grim. Hallie's car was parked across the street, just outside the 500-foot restraining order line. She sat in the driver's seat, watching, her face a thunderous mask of rage. As the new owner's agent and I did a final check of the empty rooms, the silence was broken by a scream from the front yard. We rushed outside to see Hallie, having abandoned her car, charging across the lawn toward me. "You did this!" she shrieked, her face contorted with fury. "You destroyed our family! You bitch!" She lunged, her hands reaching for me, her nails shaped into claws. Before I could even react, Bailey stepped between us, blocking her path. "Get away from her, Hallie!" The confrontation was ugly and loud. Hallie shoved Bailey, who stumbled but held her ground. My mother started wailing. My father just stood by the moving truck, a statue of impotence. The neighbours were starting to peek out of their windows. It was the shameful display my mother had always feared, happening right on her front lawn. The agent, her eyes wide, had already pulled out her phone and called the police. The arrival of a squad car brought the chaos to an abrupt halt. The officers spoke calmly to Hallie, pointing out that she was in clear violation of a court order. They escorted her back to her car with a warning that she'd be arrested if she didn't leave immediately. She shot me one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred before peeling away from the curb. After they were all gone, the moving truck lumbering down the street like a departing funeral hearse, I stood alone on the porch. The house was empty. Silent, I took out the key, locked the heavy oak door for the last time, and dropped it into the agent's hand. My belly was full and tight beneath my dress, the baby kicking softly as if sensing the shift in the world. My expression was calm. I didn't feel triumph or joy. I just felt quiet. A few days later, I drove by. The new family's car was in the driveway. A child's bicycle lay on the lawn, and standing on the sidewalk just outside the now locked front gate was Hallie. She was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, yelling something at the house that I couldn't hear through my closed windows. She looked small and powerless, a ghost haunting a life that was no longer hers. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving. 6 weeks after I locked the door to my old life, my daughter was born. She arrived in a flurry of calm efficiency, small and perfect with a dusting of dark hair. We came home from the hospital to my quiet 2-bedroom apartment, a space that was entirely ours. A few days later, Desiree and Bailey threw me the baby shower I never got. It wasn't in a rented event space with pastel balloons. It was in my living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the scent of baby powder. The guest list was small, just the 3 of us. Desiree brought a homemade lasagna, and Bailey assembled the crib I'd been putting off, her quiet competence a soothing presence. They didn't offer pity or platitudes. They just celebrated with me, their presence a quiet affirmation that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. My new life was small, but it was peaceful. The frantic, buzzing anxiety that had been my constant companion for a decade was gone, replaced by the steady, rhythmic demands of a newborn. My days were measured in feedings and diaper changes, not in mortgage payments for a house I didn't live in or emotionally managing the adults who did. On a shelf in the living room, I placed a small framed photo. It wasn't of my daughter or my friends. It was a picture of the house, the final listing photo Savannah had taken. It looked stately and beautiful, a perfect monument to a life I had survived. It was my own ghost, exercised and contained within a 4x6 frame, a reminder of the price of my freedom. A week after we came home, a large bouquet of white lilies arrived. The card was tucked deep inside the funereal blooms. The handwriting was Spencer's. Congratulations on our daughter. I'm ready to discuss a co-parenting plan that is in her best interest. I stared at the note, at his attempt to reframe his abandonment as a temporary lapse in judgment. He wasn't offering to be a father, he was making a strategic move, trying to buy his way back into a narrative he could control. I took the card and slid it into a plain white envelope. With it, I enclosed a printout of the screenshot Hallie had sent me all those weeks ago, the one that had started everything. I didn't write a single word. I sealed the envelope and mailed it back to his downtown office. It was the only answer he would ever get from me. I never heard from my parents or Hallie again. Bailey told me they had moved into a small rental 2 towns over, a place my father was paying for with the money he had so carefully hidden all those years ago. The karmic justice was so neat, so complete, it was almost poetic. They had the legacy they'd fought so hard to protect, a diminished pile of money and the 3 miserable people they had become. I learned that revenge isn't a fiery, explosive thing. It's not about screaming matches on a lawn or dramatic confrontations in a workshop. True revenge is quiet. It's the silence of a blocked number. It's the peace of a locked door. It's the freedom of realizing that the people you've spent your life trying to please can't hurt you anymore because you've finally stopped letting them. It tastes less like fire and more like silence. The baby gurgled, reaching out for the sunrise through our new window. I had never felt lighter,